Your job is not to worry about what the other person is doing in worship. Your job is to be worshiping God.
Welcome to another edition. Sorry. This is going to be a hard one. All right, here we go. Take two. Welcome to another edition of Resisting Pretense. Today, what are you doing? Stop. We moved it further away from you so you couldn't reach the buttons.
But I like to push buttons.
All right. I have no idea where we're at. We're
Round three.
Round three. No, we'll keep all that. We are here to have honest conversations about a life of faith in modern culture and maybe even inspire some faith-filled conversations in your life. And today, we're talking about worship wars. What does that mean to you, Scott?
I think you need to put the disclaimer on this first.
Oh, yeah. The disclaimer for this episode is I hope we intend to be equal opportunity offenders. Meaning, I don't care what side of the war you're on. We probably have something to say that might push a button or two. Oh, that ties into your pushing
There you
button.
go.
Nice. It was all part of it was all planned.
It's a God thing.
Which reminds me, thank you to our unofficial sponsor, Diet Coke, for allowing us to buy your product and
to consume it out of our pocketbooks.
Yeah, and feature it on our podcast. We appreciate you haven't sued us yet.
There we go. That's good. Hopefully you never will.
That's right.
So we're talking about worship wars. And in my mind, it's this argument, whether it's subconscious or just silently conscious or verbally conscious,
These are all new words.
Well, I think sometimes people will be in a worship service and they'll think all these things.
Oh, yeah.
But it doesn't come out of their mouth, which I'm very grateful for.
Yeah.
But I also think that there are people that these wars come out and they're thinking it and then they bring it forward. And there's really no basis for it other than it's what I don't like. And it really has nothing to do with worship as much as it does with my comfort or so when I think about worship wars, it's the different arguments of why the worship service was good or not good, or why I didn't like it. And it's all very subjective and not really very worshipful.
Yeah, it's the war of preference, really. Like, did I get what I prefer in a worship service? The term worship wars goes back, and the first time I heard it was in like the 1980s. And it was a big deal in the 1980s. People were talking about the worship wars. I remember that was a time in my life where I was very involved in music ministry, worship ministry. And I remember getting a trade magazine, and the title of that issue of the magazine was Worship Wars. And the war in the 1980s specifically, and it's not that it's gone away, but it's not, I don't hear this as much about it now, but the war in the 1980s was hymns versus contemporary music. And these people, there were people who were adamantly opposed to contemporary music replacing hymns in the worship life of the church. Some people who were adamantly opposed to singing hymns at all because they were a part of a traditional past that they felt was no longer relevant to the. So you had people and at times being very ugly about their disagreements and, kind of challenging each other's faith, particularly, I think, on the side of the hymn proponents. Sometimes they were saying, you don't even believe in the kind of the core Christian faith. Like you're walking away from the faith. And people on the other side, on the contemporary music side, were saying, you don't want to reach lost people. You don't care about lost people because they don't want to listen to your hymns. And at times it was ugly and contentious. And I feel like there were some ways through it. There were a lot of people who felt like both were okay, and some churches embraced blended worship where you have a little bit of each, some of each in some sort of measure. And that ensured that nobody was entirely happy. Which I thought was funny. And we do a little bit of that here at our place. We typically include at least one older hymn in our worship, and in part it's because we have people that's what they grew up with, and it's a way for them to engage. And but most of our music is contemporary, and I think the vast majority of churches today have begun to embrace more contemporary worship.
It's interesting that I feel like that the war has changed in the sense that if the music doesn't move me emotionally, then the Holy Spirit must not be present. So this must not be.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
oh, there's so much to this topic. So much. I mean, there's that. There's honestly in the scope of like the whole 1980s thing, like contemporary Christian music, the Chris Tomlins, Matt Redmans, David Crowder, the Hillsong, all of that has become almost today's traditional music.
mm-hmm.
And then there's people making Christian rap music and hip hop. And I mean, there's whole new genres of music coming into the Christian space that now today's contemporary church is like, I can't worship to that. Like, and there's a whole new, I mean, the 1980s argument is beginning to recycle because there's these forms of music that have never really been actively used in church life that are now kind of, I don't think we've yet, I can't recall us doing a worship song that had even a rap section in it.
Except for Ridge Kids.
Yeah, our kids have done some stuff.
Yeah.
And we've done that as like a side, like our kids came into adult church and they played that song. But because it was kind of like a kid's presentation, nobody really said anything that I heard.
Well, and I don't know. I would venture to guess this is true, but no time in history have we had so many generations still alive.
Yeah.
In the same time frame.
With so much variety of musical preference.
Yeah.
Right?
And so, in past church history, most of the older people died out before there was a new generation coming in with a new genre of music. Well, and then they used to say that a generation was about 30 years, and now they're saying it's anywhere from 3 to 5 because of the change in technology. And so we still have the hardline hymners.
Yeah. You're just making up words all over today. That's awesome. I love it.
So we have the hardline people that say hymns are the only way, and then we have some hardline people that say no, contemporary is the only way. And now we have a new generation coming up saying, I like the rap. I like the difference in how music moves me. And so our war is much more compact because of this tightness of generations, I think.
Yeah. And, there are a lot of people, I'm sure, that attend, we've never really used hip hop music in, which would include a lot of kind of hip hop R&B plus, maybe shades of it, but never really used hip hop music and or rap in our adult worship services. But we have a bunch of people that's what they listen to. Like during the week for they're just in entertainment, they're listening to hip hop, rap, maybe some Christian, some secular. And I think we've got, music is kind of heart language. It's emotional language, and it's specific to culture. And so, kids that grow up expressing their heart and thoughts and emotions through rap and hip hop are going to want to express their faith through that same medium. And at some point, the church has to keep adapting to new forms of music, because the music itself, the form of the music itself, there's nothing right or wrong about it.
I just had this interesting thought, and I don't know if it's true or not, but I'd be curious to hear what you have to say.
I'm
Because
sure I have a strong opinion on the matter.
well, I don't even know if it's an opinion thing. I was just thinking about though that if you went to a Spanish church and you heard the Spanish worship, you probably wouldn't be offended by it.
Right.
Because, and you might even engage in
I
it
have no
saying,
context. Yeah.
this is really cool. I am this
interesting.
is amazing that this is, and yet that is not what happens if it's in English, if it's in our home language.
Yeah. Then we're all judgmental.
Yeah, exactly. Isn't it? And that may be the same in other cultural churches. I don't know. I find that interesting that that's a difference. So
no, I have really strong opinions about worship related issues because I spent like 20 years in worship ministry as a worship pastor, and it's a big deal to me. So let's talk a little bit about some of the things you mentioned. Preference of like musical preference of style, whether it's hymn or country or kind of, you know, contemporary Christian
Southern
rock,
gospel.
Southern gospel. We got a guy in our church that like every time we lean into electric guitar, like he's happy. And
That's Southern rock.
yeah, but like he wants to hear that like that. He grew up with that, and he's not cranky about other music, but that's what grabs his heart and his attention. But so there's preference, just style preference. There is issues around quality.
Oh yeah.
About wow, that was packed with meaning. Oh yeah. There's
I think on my door it says complaint department. So
Yeah.
I guess it,
so there's issues about worship wars about the quality of what's being produced. There's worship wars about the response, like what's appropriate levels of response, like whether or not, you know, you have some people that are like, I wish people would simmer down a little bit.
sorry.
That's all right. Scott was clicking his mic. Probably can't hear that on the recording. I could hear it. So I paused. There's worship wars about, some people saying, I wish people would simmer down a little bit. And other people saying, I wish people weren't so stoic. And they, it's kind of like they want a certain level of emotionality in the response, whether it's high or low. Yeah.
How dare you sit during a
Oh
worship
yeah,
set?
like getting sideways glances because somebody sat down during worship, and I'm like, I don't care. Like, if your legs are tired, sit down. If you. To me, it's so. You cannot gauge the condition of a person's heart necessarily by their actions. Now, it may be indicative, but it's not a one-to-one relation. Like somebody can sit down and be more engaged in worship than somebody who is standing and even raising their hand, and expressing themselves. Because sometimes what they're expressing is maybe an emotionalism of the music. They're responding to the music, but not necessarily to God. And you might have somebody who's like sitting down, apparently disengaged, not even singing along because something in the music made them want to stop and pray. And so it's just dangerous to assume that why a person is responding the way they are.
Well, and to be offended by it. That's the thing I don't understand is when people are offended by somebody who's not doing what my expectations of people in worship should be doing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of like, well, what does it matter to you? Your job is not to worry about what the other person is doing in worship. Your job is to be worshiping God.
Yeah.
That you're not even focused in the right area if that's the situation.
Yeah.
We had a worship night this last Sunday night, and my wife and I were kind of sitting towards the back, and we have an older lady, and does not stand. I mean, even on stage, she doesn't stand for a long time. She's usually in a chair, and so
Yeah, she's in our worship team.
she's in our worship team. But
Yeah.
that night she was just part of the audience. But I'm watching this lady as she's got her hands raised. She's swaying back and forth. I mean, you could just see that she was engaged
Yeah.
in what God had done in her life. And everybody else, I mean, there were several people around her standing, and I'm just thinking, how beautiful a picture is that? You
Yeah.
know, and you know, in some ways that's I'm being hypocritical because I'm watching other people worship instead of worshiping myself. But I thought that was just a beautiful sense for me to go, you know what, this is what worship is about.
Yeah. And there's another aspect of Worship Wars that ties into particularly to culture of what our mindset going, what is worship for? Like what's my metric for, is this a good worship experience? Is this not? And what's the mindset I have even attending and engaging? And there's different perspectives on that. So we could talk about mindset, we could talk about preference, we could talk about quality. Where do you want to start?
What do you mean? Where do I want to start? We kind of hit all in the bit.
I know we can dig, but I think we need to drill down into some of these.
You know, I think that boy, that's a tough one. I think a lot of times, at least the conversations I have sit around the idea of a consumer mindset. It's that idea of this isn't good enough for me to be here. So,
all right. So we're going to dig in. We're going to drill down into mindset right now. And I always hear it with this language, not always, but I mean, I often hear it with this language. You know, what'd you think about worship? I don't know. I didn't get anything out of it this week. And there is a mindset behind that statement that the point of worship is for me to get something out of it. It is for my benefit, my edification. And certainly that is something that happens in worship. We often get something out of it. We get an experience with God that we feel like enriches our lives in some way. But the core basic thing that is happening in a worship service, the thing that is supposed to be happening in a worship service if we're doing it right, is that God gets where God is the object. He's the object of our worship. And so I ultimately don't care if you got anything out of worship. Like I would like you to get something out of worship, but my metric, and I think the metric, and this is where I'm like very opinionated about this, but the metric is, did God get your worship? Did you devote yourself to him? I don't care whether you liked the music, didn't like the music. I don't care whether you knew everything that was in the sermon or not. I don't care if any of the announcements applied to you. I don't care about any of that. Did you get in there and devote yourself and your attention and your expression to God in a way that made him feel honored, respected, appreciated? Like, that is the point of worship, period. Everything else is byproduct.
So we appreciate you coming and join us on I agree with you. And I would love that to be true in our idealistic world, but that's not true. That's not, and maybe it's the vernacular we use. Maybe
What do you mean it's not true? How can you agree with me and say it's not true?
Well, I would love people to go and honor God and that be their intent and be that, but
oh, you say that's...
we would not have worship wars if that were completely true.
So you're saying you agree with me, but that's not always happening.
Right.
Okay. Got
right.
it. Okay.
And I think, maybe we need to change the question, because when we ask, how was church, or what I don't know if what did you get out of church? Because I don't hear that question, but I hear a lot of times, hey, how was worship today? It automatically asks the question, what did you think? Where if we ask the question, what did you get out of worship today? Or what did you get out of church today? Or how did you interact with God in church today? It changes it to say, oh, it's not about me. It's not about, and I think so many times, especially in this consumer world, and this is where, because of all our technology, we can say, well, you guys just don't sound like Passion or like
Elevation Church,
Elevation, or
Jesus Culture,
you're just not
Bethel,
as
whoever.
passionate, or you're just not as
Hillsong.
emotional, or
I'll just keep Maranatha. You just keep talking. I'll keep just like throwing out.
Maranatha.
Hey, they're coming back, man. Crowder,
All our young leaders are going, Mara who?
Chris Tomlin for all the white people.
Anyway. is this
Sorry.
idea that we have, it's almost like I don't like what you do because it doesn't compare to them.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care that you don't like what we do. You're not here to like what we do. You're here to worship God.
Oh,
And-
Red Rocks worship. Red Rocks
and-
worship. Sorry, I can't stop.
And I've heard the concern in our church about, well, sometimes our musicians aren't as good as what we should be producing.
Mm.
And I'm like, then you guys miss the point. Because our worship team is made up of people who are developing amazing talents and gifting. And the only way they get there is by being a part of the worship experience that they're in now. And if you look at us 3 years from now, you'll be amazed at how much these people have come along.
Right.
And our job is not to give you the perfect experience. Our job is to worship God.
We're dangerously close to talking about quality, and I want to talk about quality, but I think there's one other element of the consumer mindset that I don't want to let go of before we get deeper into quality, because they are related. They're definitely related. Like, I don't think you were off track, but
Newsboys.
worship mom. The consumer mindset is, in part, is like how you view church, like the whole thing, not just the worship service, but is church to you the provider of religious goods and services, where you go and your allegiance to church is only based on who's the best provider, like what brand do I like the best? It matches my preferences, which is not necessarily a bad way to choose a church if you don't have one. But if you're part of a church, and ultimately if you commit to a church, you're committing to an expression of family. You're not committing to a provider of religious goods and services. You're committing to a family that you're a vital part of. And that is you walk into worship differently when you feel like when it is a mini family reunion gathered around, like it's the music. I say this to worship leaders when I train worship leaders. I said, at its core, this is campfire. Like, this is us sitting around a campfire singing songs together. It's nostalgic, it's emotional, it's relational singing together. Now it's also, they're wanting to do the best possible job they can, and there's more to it than that. But ultimately, like, we can't get this high and mighty. Like, it has elements of a production, but it is not a show. It is not a production. Ultimately, it is a gathering of family to express our worship to God together. And when you think of church just as a provider of religious goods and services, you are missing out on most of the value of what church is. Church is not just a production. It's not just a show. It's family.
Well, and in this day and age, you can go and get production anywhere, and so we almost can a la carte church to the point of saying, well, I'm going to
Right.
go to Hillsong for my worship, but I'm going over to Andy Stanley for my message.
Mhm.
Or I'm going, in fact, I ran into a guy the other day that he only, the church he claims to belong to is a church online.
Hmm.
And it's like, do you have any relationships with anybody in that church? Is there any kind of connection other than you pick up your phone every Sunday and look at it online? You know, and it's not that I don't think this guy is not a believer. I can clearly see he loves Jesus and has a spiritual life. But when we a la carte out, we take out the relationships with brothers and sisters that is desperate. I loved what you said. It's that mini family reunion where worship of our God really is impressive.
It's the primary value of, like, the relationship part is the primary value of church. Like that guy, and it's not to dig on him, but like to make the point. Who visits him in the hospital when he's sick? If his church experience is online and there's no local relational connection, like who sits with him when he finds out that his dad is dying of cancer? Who brings him a meal when he's got pneumonia and he can't get out of bed? That is what the church is designed to be, a place where we love and care for and support each other. And the things that we get out of it in terms of content, in terms of teaching or experiences, those are additional nice things, but they are not the core, the root of the value of being a part of a church. So yeah, our mindset of what we're doing when we walk in the door is a huge part of what ends up being the worship experience. So, but that takes us into quality a little bit, because you can go, you can get unbelievably high quality, high production value stuff like professional sound, video, lighting, professional voices, professional music. I mean, you can get that on demand.
Mhm.
You can pull up YouTube videos of the best worship bands in the world, in the country. You can pull up Elevation Worship and Bethel Worship and Hillsong Worship. I mean, you can get amazing stuff. And and you can survey churches in your community and find the ones that are more like that. But again, I think it's very dangerous that if our decisions about what family we're going to engage in are only driven by the production value of their weekly gathering. Ultimately, in my opinion, what family you engage in should be driven by, where does God want you to be? Where does he want you to connect? And then that's your family. And if your family has mediocre musicians, enjoy the fact that they love God and want to serve him and do that. And if you yearn for the high quality engagement of these professional musicians that you might hear, then watch their videos or go to their concerts, or supplement your family experience with things that satisfy your preferences. But don't use your preferences to choose your family. That to me seems backwards.
Or don't use your preferences to leave your family.
Somebody just got stabbed.
Well, what I mean by that is that you may love what they're doing today. 6 months from now, a year from now, 2 years from now, that's going to change.
Mm-hmm.
Churches they are a living, breathing entity. And so they are going to go through transitions. You are not going to have the same pastor. You're lucky if you have the same pastor all your life.
Mm-hmm.
You are blessed if you have the same pastor all your life. But most churches go through their pastors about every 3 to 5 years, some longer, some shorter. The praise band is going to change. We live in our particular area of the country. We are a transitional community. We have military coming in for about 3 years, and then they're sent off to their next base. We have teachers coming in, getting their first experience in teaching, and then they're off to places where they can get paid more. Same thing with cops, same thing with
Border
anchors,
Patrol.
same thing with, yeah. And so we are in a constant state of
Flux.
transition
Yeah.
and flux and that kind of thing. And so people who come to the church, they come because they love what the church stands for and what we do and how we connect with each other. And, you know, some weekends our worship is off the chain. Other weekends, I wonder if the chain's even there. It's just, and it's nothing against our worship ministry. It's just the reality of even as a pastor, and you can speak to this much more than I can, but there are weekends that your sermon is right on. There are other weekends you wonder who wrote that. And if our church left always because, well, that was a bad sermon, I'm leaving. That nobody, that's the point, is that
Mm-hmm.
you are there to be part of the family reunion, and to worship God, not to be Siskel and Ebert,
Right.
and make be a critic.
Well, and we have a particular value here that our church is a place where people develop. And I know some churches, particularly really large churches, have a luxury that they don't necessarily need to develop you. I wouldn't say that they don't want to. I don't know any church that doesn't care about people growing and developing. But in really large churches, churches that measure their attendance in the thousands, they have such a pool of people that when they say, hey, we want guitar players for our band, they probably have several high quality guitar players. And so the person that's just learning may have limited opportunities in church life because there's so many people that are already way further down the road than they are in their craft and their skill. In our church, we're not that large. We measure in the several of hundreds, not thousands. And so when we are bringing people into worship ministry, so part of it's our size, but part of it's our value system. Our intent is like, if you have a gift and an interest to pursue that gift, we want to help you do that. And so, we could put a worship band together that rivals, in my opinion, any band in the land, using the very best of the people we have in every role. We have an amazing group of musicians, but any given weekend, we have people who are high caliber, professional level musicians, and we have people who are learning. Somebody who's this last weekend we had a guy who was the second time ever that he'd played the bass guitar in front of a group. He'd been working on it, but it was his second time in front of people playing in a worship service. I love that. But to me, that's because it's family. We're developing our family. We're helping people pursue their passions and interests, and we're helping them grow. And in order to do that, you have to have a forum for them to do that. And we're doing the same thing in our youth ministry. We have teenagers learning instruments, playing, and they're leading worship for their own thing. Because I think some people say, well, then let the people who are learning practice on the youth. No, we got youth practicing on the youth, and we have adults practicing in the adult environment. And I think we accept that our quality production level measurement if you were tracking it. Like it varies from week to week, and that's okay because we are ultimately not about producing the highest production value every weekend. We are about developing as a family.
Well, and I think one of our values that we often talk about is that we believe in kingdom investments. And when we see ourselves, when we see part of what we're doing is developing these people, it's a kingdom investment. And sometimes those people go on to be worship leaders somewhere else,
Right.
or be part of a worship team somewhere else because they've been developed here.
And
They've reached a quality now that they are in a bigger church or whatever. And so y'all are welcome.
yeah.
But I think of a young girl who was in our youth, began developing her voice. Some of it she did on her own. Some of it she did through our worship ministry. An amazing, beautiful voice, but now is part of the worship team of a major Christian university. And that wouldn't have happened unless there are people out there going, we want to invest in you.
Right.
You're a part of our family. So we invest in you. And I think sometimes, and I want to be careful how I say this because I don't know how big churches function. But sometimes I think it's like going to a big high school knowing that only 2% of the high school is ever going to make it on the football team.
Yeah.
And even though there's people who could develop into those things, they never do because they can't, they're shut down right away.
Yeah. The bigger the school, the bigger the offensive line.
Yeah, exactly. And in our case, we look at it and say, the more people that are interested, the more people we can have engage in different pieces of our worship. That we're going to put you in Saturday night, or we're going to put you on Sunday morning because they're two different teams, and we're going to see where we're going to put you in a video, or we're going to,
And again, I mean, this is where quality and the mindset overlap. If you are walking into a worship service and the quality measurement, the only quality measurement that you're tracking in your head is this good for me? Then you will often be disappointed unless you're in a mega church. But if you're walking into a church service with a family-oriented mindset, then your quality measurement is, how are we doing of developing the people that we have? That's a different measurement. It's still a quality measurement, but it's the quality of development. And you can take great joy in that when you see that person who, I've had some amazing joy. We've had a young lady in our worship ministry that started coming because her husband was a drummer in the band. And she would come and hang out while he was playing with the band. And then one day somebody kind of overheard her singing off to the side and said, "You have a really great voice." But she was, "Oh, no, I could never do that." And slowly but surely they kind of pulled her in, and she began singing with the band. And then she decided she wanted to learn an instrument. And so she can play the piano now, and she's growing in that skill, and her confidence is growing, and her expression is growing. And that, to me, like, I take more joy out of seeing the development of that than I do in us having something that could play on the radio. And I think it's tied to that mindset about what are we there for, and that's very important. So, what about response? There's one little aspect of response I don't think we really talked. We talked about, you can't really judge somebody else's response. You can't read into what's going on in their heart. I think on the other side, sometimes we judge a worship service by how it moves us to respond. So, like, did I get goosebumps? Then it was a good worship service, or did I get excited? It was a good worship service. I had a friend, though, once say this to me, and I've never forgotten it. I think it's hilarious. But he was reflecting on the emotionalism in songs, and how some worship songs could very easily double as a love song if you just changed Lord to girl. It would be an expression of love song. And he's like, does every worship song have to be an orgasmic experience? And I was just like, wow. But it was a good point. Like, is it okay to just express something to God that is true that doesn't necessarily have to be this, like, I'm at the end of my rope pouring out my heart on, like, an ecstatic experience? Can it just be an expression of something that's true? And I think both are okay. Like, our emotions can be involved, at times should be involved, but worship is not just an emotional experience. It's also an experience of our will to say, I'm going to express these things to God because they're true, because he deserves it, whether I'm really feeling it or not. Because sometimes, like, the deepest expression of worship is praise when you feel terrible. Mm-hmm. Like when you're upset, you're angry, or you're hurt, and you don't understand why God is allowing things in your life that you don't want to be in your life, but you stop to say, but you're worthy of my praise, even though I don't get you right now. That doesn't come with goosebumps. That comes with tears, gritted teeth. Mm-hmm. And so I think sometimes that's another aspect of response that we need to think about when we think about worship.
Well, and I think it's really, and I'm gonna just be blunt about it, I think it's really arrogant to say everybody should have the same experience as I do.
Yeah.
So because I think if you did a poll of people coming out, you would get this widespread of everything to, oh, it was great, it was the most beautiful experience, to, I got nothing. It was, and there are so many aspects of what I'm going into worship with. If I'm having a great day, my worship might be much more praiseworthy, glorifying, that kind of thing. But if I'm coming in and it's just been a horrible day, I might just be going, God, I need you right now. I just need to be in your presence right now. And again, it might be through grit and tears, and sometimes it's just, you know what, it's been an okay day. The world's okay. I'm here. I'm here to worship. I'm here just to be in your presence. And if we're always coming in with the attitude of, I'm going to be in your presence, that's worship. If I'm always coming in with the attitude, I've got to get something out of it, then that's almost a criticism or a condemnation of God. Why didn't you give me what I needed today? And we've got to be really careful about that.
Yeah. Oh, good stuff. So do you think our judgment when it comes to, like, the worship space, is that just indicative that we risk being judgmental kind of across the board, that we have judgmental attitudes as Christians and we're criticizing everything? Is it a worship problem, or is it a judgmentalism problem?
That is a great question. And I think that we have to ask ourselves that.
Yeah.
That if I'm being judgmental about all this, am I being judgmental in other areas of my life? I think about this. We used to take care of this elderly lady, and her name was Marie, and just loved her to death, but oftentimes would have spiritual conversations with her, just trying to figure out where she was and had she accepted Jesus and that kind of thing. And she said to me one day, she goes, it's not that I don't believe. She said, but when I would go to church, I would hear people talk about, oh, look at that lady, how her hat's on wrong, or that I would never wear that to church. Or now this is 80 years ago.
Yeah.
But she says, if that's what church is about, if church is about being judgmental, I didn't want to be a part of it, because I don't think that that's what it should be.
Right.
And it raised the question in my mind about, if I am judging my church, What am I judging other places? Where am I putting expectations where they don't belong?
Right.
And so I think it is a great question what you just asked.
I think anytime we indulge in a judgmental attitude, we've got to be really cautious. I think Jesus and Paul both in the scripture give us tons of warning about judgment, and it's not that we should never pass judgment at all under any circumstances, but there's very few circumstances where we're in that role to be judging. And I think we have to be very, very cautious, very careful. Jesus said, I came to not the healthy, but for the sick. Like, the physician doesn't come to help healthy people.
I didn't come to those who think they're righteous. I came to those who know they're sinners.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Paul uses different language, but he said, that there is therefore now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. Like if God isn't judging, if there's no condemnation for you on the way that you worship, there's no condemnation for that person that was worshiping differently than you are. Like, we have to be very careful about judging other people's motives, their expressions, that kind of thing. And there are times, I think where it's appropriate to confront, but it ought to be done very humbly, very carefully, very thoughtfully. And I just think that's something we have to be very cautious about.
Because here's the problem. Judgment sticks. It's not something that easily goes away.
Ooh, wow.
And so when I say I didn't like that sermon, the next week I'm looking to see, is it going to get better? Is it going to get worse? Is it going to be the same thing? Is it because I've already set that judgment, and that judgment sticks now. And that's why judgment is so dangerous for us to be engaged in, when God is really the only one who has the right to do that. I think you're right. I think there are points when we say we have a responsibility to help correct when somebody is doing something sinfully wrong. But when we start to judge on my opinion, it not only harms the person that I'm placing the judgment against, but it harms me. Mm-hmm. It sticks to me and causes me a dark spot that I don't want in my life. And so I think we have to be really careful about that.
Yeah, and I've heard you say this before, so I'm gonna insert it in, because you didn't. It may harm you, but it may also harm someone else. Mm-hmm. Not even the person you're judging. I mean, like when you pass that judgment and you make a comment like, "Man, I just didn't really care for that sermon today," then the person that you offhandedly make that comment to is like, "Oh, well, I mean, I thought it was fine, but now I guess I'll go back and think through and retroactively pass judgment on it." Or maybe the next time they come, they're like, "I don't know, like do I need to be more like, they may come the next time with a more judgmental filter or lens on their listening, rather than just being open to what God might have for them." And so I think it may not just affect you and the object of your judgment, but it may affect people in your orbit that are now put off by that judgment.
Yeah, and it goes back to judgment sticks, and it may not, even the person you're judging on stage may never hear it. The person next to you may have heard it, that you're directing the conversation to, but it may also be heard by the person behind you who just happens to be hearing the conversation.
Yeah.
And that's just a dangerous place to be.
Yeah. I think, to me, the big picture, the beautiful picture, is you show up on a weekend at church, and you're there with your family, some of whom you may have seen during the week at different things, some of whom you may only see on the weekend, but it's like that special time that you get to gather with this family. Um, and and then during that time together, a group of people have prepared to lead in worship and to help the family express something to God that God deserves to hear. And they're up there doing their best to model that expression to God. And some of them are stretched way out of their comfort zone and you don't realize it. Some of them are in their sweet spot and they're loving it, and that, like, all of that is beautiful. It's really beautiful. And as you join with them, they're encouraged. And that's why sometimes the atmosphere, the mood of a worship service feels like it's just building and building, because they're trying to do something and you're responding, and that makes them more engaged and then you more engaged. And it's this beautiful, like, build. And when we live with that kind of sense of this is what we're about together, and then if it transitions and we're talking about the scripture or something, the focus does change, because it's something that maybe applies to us, that we can, that's for us. But ultimately, the way you continue in worship, even through like a sermon, is the way you're giving your attention to God. Like, there's this openness. There's this, what do you have for me, God? Because I want to be receptive. I want to honor you by listening to your word and listening to how it might apply to my life and being willing to commit myself. Like, that's all beautiful and unique in our culture. Like, that kind of stuff doesn't really happen somewhere else. It's a fairly unique thing to the church experience. And so that's what it can be. That's what we should aspire for it to be. And we need to have the grace with each other to allow for the difference of preference, to allow for the difference in quality, to allow for the difference of response, and just celebrate that we get to do this together. And we're so lucky here that we get to do it. Like, we don't have to go hide in a cave somewhere and, or get into someone's basement. Like, we have the freedom to do this publicly. We have the freedom to do this proudly and boldly without fear of reprisal. Like, what a gift to us that I think we so often take for granted. And I'd love to see us just embrace it more and more.
And I think if somebody said, what is your life verse? Which I don't know if I have a life verse or a life philosophy or anything like that, but something that has always resonated deep, deep, deep in my heart is the scriptures that says, think more highly of others than you do of yourself. When I'm in worship and I see those people up there, maybe I should be thinking, well, I can't play guitar. I can't sing. Or thank God they are willing to do that. Thank God that they're willing to show up 2 hours early and put together this set. Or thank you that they're willing to sacrifice their time, even though I show up 15 minutes late to church. Sorry, there was a left-handed dig.
Little judgment there.
Yeah. Did it stick? But my point being is
I reject your judgment.
Thank you. Pretty sad when the pastor shows up 15 minutes late. And you never do it. That's a joke. I think that if we walk into worship and we're looking to say, I'm here to worship God, and thank you, Lord, that you brought these people to do it with me. I think that's a huge step in saying we're here to worship,
That's good. I think that's a great place to end. This has been a fun conversation. I think we weren't entirely sure if we'd had enough to talk about. I think we had plenty.
We could probably go on for another hour, but
yeah, I mean, in some ways it's really a conversation about judgment. It's just in the context of what happens in church worship. And I think it's a great place where we could grow and show a side of Christ that our culture really needs to see. This side that is graceful and warm and thoughtful about involving people.
For me, I feel like this conversation has caused me to say I need to be a little bit more sensitive to how I say things or what I'm looking at. Or so it was. I hope it's been encouraging and a little convicting to you, because I know it's been encouraging and convicting to me.
Yeah, it makes me, and it also makes me even more so looking forward to worship this weekend.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I hope this inspires faith-filled conversations for you, and we look forward to seeing you next time on Resisting Pretense.